Hello everyone, welcome back. Here's our first video lecture, and this one's going to be on secondary dominants and secondary leading tone chords. So let's get right into it. So the first one we're going to be working with is a secondary dominant chord. Now we're going to be seeing a lot of these chords used with predominant and dominant harmonies. If we think back to our phrase model, thinking in tonally functional music, we're going to have tonic, predominant, dominant, and then ultimately tonic. Really kind of defining functionally tonal music. We're going to see a lot of these secondary dominant and secondary leading tones chords leading to predominant and dominant harmonies as a way to kind of expand that tension to really give us a good resolution. So let's get right into it and use one of those predominant harmonies. We're going to be set in the key of D, and we're going to start with a 5/7 of 4. So the first thing we have to do is find what's the 4 chord in the key of D. That's going to be G. Now if we think G, what is the 5th of G? It's going to be D. So we're moving to the 4 chord, and we're going to be using our 1 chord, just regular old D major, and making it a secondary dominant chord. So let's talk about how we would do that. So we're going to write out a D major here. Nice big space. Sorry, I keep messing up this mirror thing. So nice spaced out D major. Now how are we going to make this a 5/7 of 4? Well, we already have a major chord. So that's the first step we need for a dominant chord, is we do have that major third, the F sharp. The other thing we'll have to do is we're going to take that second root, the one up top there in the treble clef, and lower it by a whole step to give us that flat 7 or dominant 7. And there we go. That's all we have to do to get this to be a 5/7 of 4, a secondary dominant. Now, we're not always going to be converting a naturally major chord or a diatonically major chord into a secondary dominant chord. Oftentimes, we will have to use a minor chord and convert it into a secondary dominant. So let's try one of those. Let's do a 5/7 of 6. So let's do the thing that we did before, a little bit step intensive, but some people it's really good for steps. I know for me it was really good for steps, and then I started getting faster with them. So let's define what's the 6th chord in D major. B minor. What is the 5th of B? Again, think we're trying to get that 5-to-1 dominant relationship. So what's the 5th of B? F sharp. F sharp is a diatonic chord in D major, but it is a minor chord. It's our 3 chord. So let's go ahead and spell that out. There we go. So now we have a regular 3 chord, and we're trying to make it a secondary dominant of 6. So what we have to do here is we have to raise our third, because this is naturally a minor chord. So what is the third of this chord? It's A. So we have to take this A natural and make it A sharp. So the second thing we need to do is to take our root up there, that second root, the F sharp, which usually in a triad will double the root. And we're taking that and we're lowering it to make it a dominant 7 or flat 7. So we're going to take that F sharp, lower a whole step, and get E natural. And voila, there we go. We now have, there we go. We now have a 5/7 of 6. We had to raise our third because it's a naturally minor chord. The 3 chord is naturally minor. And we had to take our second root that we usually double in triad and lower to give us that flat 7 or dominant 7. And there we go. Now, all these chords can be tonicized except for one. We think of all of our chords in the key, our 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, and 6 chord. All of those can be tonicized because they have a 5th that corresponds naturally in the scale. There is one chord in the scale that we cannot tonicize, and that's going to be 7. So we think the 7th scale degree in key of D, we'll keep it in key of D, is our C sharp. Now, if we go up a 5th from C sharp, we get not a G natural, we get a G sharp, which is something that we do not naturally have in the scale. So that's one reason. We can't get that 5-to-1 dominant to tonic relationship. The other reason is if we build a triad off of that 7th scale degree, we're going to get a diminished chord, which is a dissonant sonority. A dominant chord is technically a dissonant sonority. So we can't go from dissonance to dissonance. That doesn't equal a cadence or a resolution, which is what we're looking for with a secondary dominant chord, is a resolution. Tonic, dominant to tonic resolution. Here, if we want dominant chord to diminished chord, we wouldn't have a resolution at all. It just doesn't work. So those are 2 reasons that we can't, in a traditional sense here, tonicize the 7 chord. So let's move on to some inversions with this. So let's take the one we just did, that 5-7 of 6, and let's talk about some inversions with it. So I'll write it back out here. Remember the A sharp, natural, there we go. So let's talk about some inversions with this. The first one we're going to see is 6-5, and that's with the 3rd of the chord in the bass. So we're just going to shuffle this around. So let's do this. A sharp, C, F sharp, E. So there's our 6-5. So we got our 3rd in the bass, and we're shuffling everything else around. So that's a 6-5. That's our first inversion. So let's get into our second inversion. Now this one is kind of tricky because we would think second inversion, or 5th in the bass, automatically we're thinking little voice screaming back in our head, 6-4, because we've heard so much interesting stuff about the 6-4 chord, hopefully through music theory 1 and 2. It's not. It is going to be a 4-3. When we're working with 4 notes, it's a 4-3 when we have that second inversion. When we're working with a triad, it's 6-4. So 5-4-3 is our second inversion, which will have the 5th of the chord in the bass. Let's just shuffle that around. Let's give it a better look here. So C sharp, A sharp, F sharp, E. So there we go. So our 5-4-3 is our second inversion. We're working with a 4-note chord. There we go. And now because we have a 4-note chord, we are allowed to have one more inversion. And that's going to have the 7th in the bass. Almost running out of room here. 5-4-2 is going to be with the 7th in the bass. And this one's really easy to mix up with 4-3. 4-3 is the 5th in the bass. 4-2 has the 7th in the bass. So let's write that out. E, let's go back to C sharp. And F sharp. There we go. So we see all the way at the end. I didn't run out of room. I almost did. But that's our 4-2 because it has our 7th in the bass. So if we go back through it, there we go. Having a mirror problem. So our root position has that F sharp in the bass. Our first inversion has the 3rd, which is A sharp, the note we had to alter in the bass. And our second inversion, our 4-3, is going to have that C sharp in the bass. And lastly, our 4-2, which has the 7th in the bass, is going to have that E in the bass. All right. So let's move on. And let's start talking about some leading tone chords. Now these ones is a very easy way to find these leading tone chords. So what you do is you take the root of the chord that we are trying to get to, and we just go down by half step, and we start the chord from there. Hence the term leading tone chord. So let's take, just keep it in the key of C, and let's do just a 1 chord. So we're going to take a 1 chord and create a leading tone chord from that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with our 1 chord, C major. Let's put our root right here. Good old C. And we're going to go down a half step. We're just going to give us B. If we think in the key of C, that B being the third of G major chord, third of that dominant chord, which will functionally always go up to our root, just a half step below. And we're going to create a leading tone chord from here. So we write out a 5, little circle, 7/1. Now here's what we do. We're going to take this B and we're just going to stack minor thirds. That's all we have to do. So we're going to go B, minor third up from that, D, minor third up from D, F, minor third up from F, A flat. So here's when we have to alter, A flat. So in closed position in bass clef, this is what it would look like. Remember, it's always going to be consecutive minor thirds. It's what we would call a symmetrical voicing, or symmetrical harmony, because all of the intervals between each of the notes is the same. It's a minor third. Now, that doesn't mean you're always going to see it in this way, where you're going to see just a bunch of stacked minor thirds and go, oh, there we go. Sometimes you might see it where it looks a little bit, let's just flip some of these around. We might see something that looks like this. But that still doesn't negate the fact that we're working with the same 4 notes that have a symmetrical intervallic spacing between each of them. We have our B, we have our D, we have our F, and we have our A flat. If we spell them in closed position, we'll see those consecutive minor thirds really clearly. Now for this one, we could also go through our inversions of it. So because we're working with a seventh type chord, 4-note voicing, our figure bass is going to be relatively the same as what we saw for the inversions that we saw with the secondary dominant chord. So let's go ahead and work through it here. This B would be our root position. So let's move into another one. Let's just go up and spell it from D. So there we would have a 7 little circle 6/5 of 1. So D, let's go A flat, let's go F, and let's go B. So there we go. And let's do the other one. So the second inversion, remember, not 6/4. Don't follow the same trap that I have done numerous times, even recently. It is a 4/3. And this one I will need to make more room. All right. So we want to think back, what was the 5th of this chord? B was our root, D was our 3rd, and then F was our 5th. But technically it's a flat of 5th because we're working with a diminished. F, B, let's go D, and let's go B flat. So there we go. And because this chord has 4 notes in it, we have one more inversion that is available to us. And this one I have to erase that 4/3, unfortunately, because I ran out of room. And here we are with A flat. That's going to be a 7 little circle 4/2 of 1 in the key of C. So we're going to have that A flat. So this one I spelled kind of in an interesting way on purpose. A flat, B natural, F, D. Now this interval, A flat to B, you're right, that's kind of a strange one in our vertical and horizontal writing, so our melodic and vertical harmonic writing is something that we usually kind of don't use because it's an awkward interval. It is a augmented second. It's one that is difficult to see naturally. And whenever we see that augmented second, either written out vertically, like this, or arpeggiated, that should instantly bring something off in our mind that we're working with some sort of diminished quality chord, usually a fully diminished quality chord. There is another type of diminished chord that we will see, but not nearly as much as this fully diminished 7th chord. Sometimes we will see a half diminished 7th chord. And this one we won't see very often, but we will see it occasionally, sometimes in Schubert. I know it pops up here and there. But this is one we won't see nearly as much as the fully diminished seventh chord. So we'll start with keep our same key of C, and let's write one out. So this one, in terms of the way it looks, is going to be a bit different. So if we take a look here, rather than having the 7 with just a regular circle and a 7, here we're going to have a circle with a slash through it, denoting the half diminished quality 7. So here's the big difference with this chord. We're going to start still with our B, as a leading tone type chord. We're still working with in the context of C. So we go down a half step, got the B, that's our starting point for a root position. D is going to be the same, F is going to be the same. Now here's the big one where it's different. We are going to have an A natural on that. We don't have to alter the A at all. So this chord, as we are seeing it right now, because we have all naturals, is the one that naturally occurs in the voicing. If we just stack thirds, we're going to get this half diminished 7th chord, which is another reason that we won't see composers using it very much, because we don't have that altered tone in it to give us more of a push into our resolution. There's not enough dissonance here. There's some, but it's not enough for quite a few people. So if we think of the intervals in between all those notes, so B to D, we have a minor third. D to F, we have our another minor third. Now here's another reason that it's different. We don't have that symmetrical, every interval is a minor third. Here we have F to A natural, a major third. So we have a bit of a combo breaker, breaking off that consecutive minor thirds, and we get that major third at the end. Again, we'll see this, but we won't see it as often as we'll see the fully diminished 7th chord used as a secondary leading tone chord. And that's just because it's just not as crunchy. Doesn't provide as much of a need for resolution as the naturally occurring half diminished 7th chord. I consult my notes so I don't ramble. All right. Okay. All right, lastly, let's talk about some voice leading characteristics for secondary dominant chords. We'll go back to secondary dominant chords. Now, there are 3 hard and fast rules that we need to abide by when we're working with secondary dominant chords. They should be like etched into, you know, some like granite or something. All right, so the first one is we don't double the leading tone. You should only have one leading tone in your secondary dominant chords. Remember, the leading tone is the note that is a half step below the root of our chord that we're leading to. So we don't want to double that. And this is still, these when I list through them, they're going to seem like, oh, wait, I remember these from writing dominant chords. It's the same sort of thing, except now we're being able to use them, not just in the capacity of 5 to 1, we can use them to tonicize other chords. The second rule is we must resolve the leading tone up if it's in an exterior part of the voicing. If the leading tone is in the top voice, that needs to go up into the tonic of the next chord. Conversely, if it's down the bottom, if we have a leading tone in the bottom of the chord in the bass, which would make it a first inversion, it has to lead up into the tonic. If it's in the exterior voice, soprano or bass, it has to lead up to the tonic. The last rule, the third one, is that the 7th, regardless of where it is in the voicing, always leads down. So 7ths go up. Yeah, no, 7ths go down. Sorry, I always mess that up because leading tone is up. Leading tone goes up, 7th goes down. All right. So those are our big rules here. And let's write this out in sort of a example for us to check out. So let's keep it in the key of C, which is one of our favorite keys because it's just so good for demonstration. And you can transpose around. All right, so let's keep it in the key of C. We're just gonna do a really quick 1, keep it in position 5/7 of 6. And if all this is a review for you, that's great. If it's not, wonderful. We're all kind of getting in at the same point. And getting through all this material together. So here's the cadence that we're looking for. We're looking for a 1, 5, 7, 6, and then a 6. So let's write that out. Get a little bit higher voice in here. G. So here's my 1 chord, kind of opting for a little bit more of a orchestral style voicing here with the octave in the bottom and the third up top. And we're going to move into that 5, 7 of 6. So what is our 6th chord? A minor. And what's the 5th of A? E. So we're going to build this off of an E. So E, let's do that. Let's do a B. Get some smooth voice leading here. And then a D. And then that G, we're going to make that a G sharp. All right, so let's take a look here. So we have our E, we have our B, then we have our D, our flat 7, and we have our G sharp, which is going to become our leading tone. So if we think to our voice leading rules that we just talked about, we already know what 2 of our voicings are going to do because they're our top ones. That G sharp has to, because it's an exterior voice, it has to lead up to our root, A. That 7, our D, has to go down. And because we're going to A minor, that D leads down to C. And from here, let's just write these out. Let's keep it A, A. There we go. Oh, I forgot to write mine. There we go. So leading tone goes up, 7th goes down. There's a quick way to resolve this in a root position style voicing. Now let's do a quick example. Almost done. A quick example of using one of these leading tone chords and resolving those. Now this one kind of has some similar rules to working with a secondary dominant. So let's keep it in the key of C. And what we're going to look for is just 1, a fully diminished 7, a 1, and then back to 1. So we write out our first voicing here. C, G, C, E. Okay, let's stick with this one. A bit more compact. This one's a bit more of a nice, bright, sort of choral style voicing, especially if you have good basses that can hold that C. All right, so we have that. Now let's spell out our leading tone chord for 1. So we're going to go down a half step to B, and let's just spell it out from there. B, let's go E flat, E, F. There we go. Remember, for this chord, the only one we had to alter was that A, to make it an A flat. If it was an A natural, it would be the half diminished 7, which is doesn't have as much crunch as we want. We want that A flat to give it some crunch. All right. So here, we could probably think of where we would resolve this. We can go right back down. And that leads me to one of my points here, is when you're doing one of these 4-part writing examples, look for smooth, stepwise voice leading. If it's something that presents itself as easy as this, sure, we had to just take that A flat down. Let me just write this out. So we're following our voice leading that's sort of similar to our secondary dominant chord, where we had our leading tone in the bass, needs to go up. Our A flat, now, mind you, that's a type of 7, that's a double flat 7. So remember, our A natural from B to A, that's a flat 7, but we take the A and make it flat one more time, it's a double flat 7. That one still leads down. So we have sort of a similar voice leading idea. And back to what I was saying just a second ago, make sure I keep these threads going. It's kind of weird teaching to a computer. We want to, in our voice leading for our 4-part writing, we always want to follow some stepwise voice leading. If it presents itself to move by step, do it, absolutely. The other thing we want to look for is contrary motion. As we can see here, this part of the voicing goes up, this goes down. Oh, This goes down, this goes up. Contrary motion is what we're going to see a lot of for good voice leading, along with, whenever possible, good stepwise voice leading. All right, that about wraps it up for this video. I will be in touch very soon. I think next week we're going to start our first, I'm going to have my first kind of Zoom office hours open house. You can show up if you'd like to. I'm more than happy to help you out with whatever I can. And if not, it's not mandatory. But that's about it. I'll be in touch with that. And in the meantime, if you have any difficulties with the homework or anything is unclear, I've already gotten a few emails. Don't hesitate to email me. I will respond back to you as soon as possible. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you around.